Welcome back to the School of Big History, where the mission is to come to understand the entirety of our history. Kindly assault the like and subscription button. Let's go. In this video, the fourth of an at least 5-part series, we'll be covering the pharaohs of the late 18th and early 19th dynasties, a time when Egyptian power was flourishing. We pick up our narrative of the history of Egypt with the reign of Amenhotep III, who ruled from around 1390 to 1352 BC. By this time, Egypt had already entered into the larger Near Eastern political world and had even settled into an understanding with the Kingdom of Mitanni. Let's briefly recount some of the major events that led to this, starting with the first pharaoh of the dynasty Amenhotep III is placed in, the 18th dynasty. The 18th dynasty had gotten going with Ahmose I ousting the Hyksos from Egypt and slightly beyond, campaigning some up the Levant. After Ahmose I came Amenhotep I, and Thutmose I followed him. Thutmose I campaigned up the Levant, reaching the Euphrates River. Thutmose I was followed by Thutmose II, who was followed formally by Thutmose III, but really Hatshepsut pulled the strings of empire, but after her death, Thutmose III took control. He put down rebelling vassals at the Battle of Megiddo of 1457 BC, and over the following years he campaigned numerous other times up the Levant in Palestine and Syria. He even crossed the Euphrates into Mitanni territory. Relationships with Mitanni softened in the reign of the next pharaoh, Amenhotep II, and the next pharaoh, Thutmose IV, married a Mitanni princess. It's into this scene that Amenhotep III, somewhere between the age of 2 and 12, comes to power around 1390 BC. Much of the information for this video was gleaned from the textbook you can see on screen, link in the description below. Under Amenhotep III, Egypt wasn't particularly militarily concerned, and Egypt, or at least Egypt's elite, flourished. Diplomatic and trade connections with the Near East grew, and at some point, as reflected in the Amarna letters, Egypt divided their territory in Syria and Palestine into 3 distinct administrative zones, Amurru, Apu, and Canaan, all 3 combining to house some 60 vassal city-states. Diplomatically, Amenhotep III married foreign princesses, including 2 from Mitanni, Keluheba and Taduheba, and though he'd gladly bring the princesses of others into his court, none would go the other way. One of the Amarna letters records a Babylonian king representing Amenhotep III as rejecting the Babylonian king's request for one of his daughters and justifying this approach, saying, "From time immemorial, no daughter of the king of Egypt is given to anyone." The Amarna letters are a collection of diplomatic letters recovered from the site of Aten, the city founded by Amenhotep III's successor, who brought some of his predecessor's diplomatic correspondence to this new capital. This one diplomatic thorn may not have bothered the other power players too much because it was a more prominent thing to send one's daughter to another's court, thus becoming this other king's father-in-law, than to have another's daughter sent to you. And besides, Egypt went along with the other diplomatic norms, such as sending elaborate gifts, referring to fellow major kings as brothers, and Egypt also adopted cuneiform writing of the then lingua franca Akkadian for inter-great power diplomacy. While Egypt's refusal to send out princesses was clearly not a deal-breaker, it wasn't preferred, as the Babylonian king follows up after mentioning Amenhotep III's refusal to send a princess. Why not? You are a king. You do as you please. Were you to give a daughter, who would say anything? And he went further, suggesting that if Amenhotep refused to send him an actual daughter, the least he could do was send someone else and pretend. Grown daughters, beautiful women, must be available. Send me a beautiful woman as if she were your daughter. Who is going to say, she is no daughter of the king? While the coming Pharaoh Akhenaten's reign is justifiably fixated upon for the drastic changes momentarily wrought in Egypt's religious domain, already with Amenhotep III, the prominence of the Aten, the solar disk deity, sees a rise in the pharaoh's heart. Amenhotep's queen Tai had a boat named the Aten Gleams, and Amenhotep III even called himself the Radiant Solar Disk. Another intriguing similarity with the coming reign of Akhenaten is the prominence of Amenhotep III's queen. As for powerful females, already earlier in the 18th dynasty there had been the reign of the female pharaoh Hatshepsut, whose memory was formally blotted out from history some years following her death. But as we'll shortly see, the 18th dynasty would see some more respect put on the female name, and would even see one more female pharaoh, albeit a briefly reigning one, who may have had/been a co-regent throughout. As for the prominence of Amenhotep's Queen Tai, she is seen in statues at Amenhotep's side showing them of equal stature, and she was also worshipped as the goddess Hathor, divine spouse of Amenhotep as Ra, at a temple at Sadenga. The lack of major military involvements beyond the empire's boundaries afforded Amenhotep the space to turn inward, where he ordered many constructions. Amenhotep III had a palace built near Thebes at Melkada, and in his later years this was where he lived. This now largely destroyed mud brick construction was covered with white plaster, upon which were frescoes, some of which we find. Frescoes adorned not just the walls, but the floors and ceilings as well. Thebes itself he built up greatly as well, including the core of the dedicated to Amun Luxor temple. Near this Theban palace, the Luxor temple, Amenhotep III had a lake made for Queen Tai, who he'd married in the second year of his reign. He also expanded the temple at Karnak. Amenhotep III's mortuary temple was very large and is now mostly gone. Also rather large, estimated at some 720 tons apiece, are the so-called colossi of Memnon, which I'm going to call the colossi of Amenhotep III. These 65-foot-tall representations of Amenhotep fronted the mortuary temple on both sides of the entrance. Amenhotep III had 6 children, 4 girls and 2 boys. The 4 daughters' names are Satamun, Henutaneb, Isis, and Nebeta. Of the 2 boys, the younger boy isn't mentioned until late in Amenhotep III's reign, while mention is made of the older son, the crown prince and high priest of Memphis, Thutmose. Thutmose predeceased Amenhotep III, however, and the younger son, Amenhotep IV, soon to be Akhenaten, first may have served for a bit as co-regent with his father, and definitely after his father's death in perhaps 1352 BC, Amenhotep IV is pharaoh. We'll be speaking as if Amenhotep IV/Akhenaten wasn't co-regent and ascended the throne in 1352 BC. The cause underlying the coming name change from Amenhotep to Akhenaten wasn't swallowed entirely willingly by the relevant power players and social forces, such that a couple of decades after Akhenaten's reign, his reign and that of the following pharaohs would be excised from Egypt's history. This went down when the general Horemheb came to power as the last 18th dynasty pharaoh, and he represented the pharaonic history as going directly from Amenhotep III to himself, Horemheb, skipping over Akhenaten and a number of other pharaohs besides, all tainted by the Amarna heresy. Excising a name from a monument or wall and inscribing one's own doesn't entirely remove history, however, as the inscription is now deeper than it would otherwise be. Another note for future destroyers and deniers of our cultural heritage is that if you want to eradicate from memory the evil heretical Akhenaten, or whatever else of reality blights your fantastical version, you need to actually destroy it all. And recycling monuments to construct your own will leave the opportunity for those in the future to put more of the story back together again. Not to single out Horemheb too much, however, as many rulers have acted in a similar manner, and in fact Akhenaten himself is guilty of removing images and instances of the name of Amun. An incredible boon to our knowledge of this period is what's been found at Akhenaten's capital city of Aten, which we'll meet in a minute. As we saw, by 1352 BC, Akhenaten had begun his reign, carrying the soon-to-be rejected birth name centered around the god Amun, Amenhotep IV. For the time being, Thebes remained the religious center, but already in these early years, the god Aten was ascendant. For one, Amenhotep IV had a temple built for Aten at Thebes/Karnak called Gempa Aten. In the courtyard of Gempa Aten were colossal statues of Amenhotep IV, including a 3-meter tall one showing him nude and without genitalia. The eminence of Aten could be seen beyond the construction of this temple, such as with Akhenaten's wife, the formerly non-royal Nefertiti, who was even more prominent than Amenhotep III's Queen Tai, having her name preceded by Neferu Aten. Early on as well, Aten's name appears in cartouches indicating his kingship. Further, during these first Theban years, the depiction of the god Aten transitioned away from the traditional anthropomorphization representation style. Aten started out being shown with the traditional style of a man with a falcon head atop of which is a sun disk, but was soon depicted far less corporeally, with merely the sun and its rays, with the rays ending as hands. In Amenhotep IV's 5th year at the helm, it was time for some further changes. He changes his name and abandons Thebes. Pharaoh Akhenaten, meaning the one who is beneficial to the Aten, founded a new city, Aten, meaning the horizon of the Aten, at modern-day Tel El Amarna, located between the two prior capitals, Thebes in the south and Memphis up north. Aten was a planned city spanning 16 by 13 kilometers, built on a previously uninhabited site, and an open to the sun temple to Aten sat in its center. An important change, and this one would last beyond the efforts to go back on Akhenaten's ways, is in the language used for literary creations, which transitioned to the vernacular of the time. I'd like to take a closer look at one such text now, the Great Hymn to Aten, whose most thorough version is found on the walls of the unused Amarna tomb of Ai, vizier to Akhenaten and eventual pharaoh of his own right. Akhenaten is argued by many to have been a monotheist, and some of the evidence in support of this claim comes from the Hymn to Aten, which expresses a strikingly universalist and exclusionary notion of the deity. Let's directly encounter much of the latter part of this hymn as translated in the book shown on screen, link below. How various are the things you have created, and they are all mysterious to the sight. O sole God, without another of your kind, you created the world according to your desire, while you were alone, with mankind and cattle and every sort of small beast, all those upon land, those who go upon feet, those who are on high, soaring upon their wings, the foreign lands of Kor and Cush, and all that belongs to Egypt. You give each person his place in life, and you provide for his needs. Each one has his sustenance, and his lifetime is reckoned for him. Tongues are separated by words, the natures of persons as well, and their skins are made different so you can distinguish the peoples. You create Happy the Nile in the underworld to bring him at your desire to nourish the people, just as you create them for yourself, Lord of them all, who is weary for them. O Lord of all earth, who shines for them, O Aten of day, awesome in majesty, all the foreign lands are far away, yet you make their lives possible. For you have placed a Happy in the sky, that he might come down upon them, making waves upon the mountain like those of the great green sea, to water the fields in their villages. How well ordered it is, your governing, O Lord of eternity, Happy in heaven. You belong to the foreign peoples, to the small beasts of each land who go upon feet, and Happy comes from below to beloved Egypt as well, while your arrays are nursing each meadow. You shine and they live, they grow strong for you. You fashion the seasons to make all your creation flourish, the winter for cooling and the heat which ripens, and you have made the sky far off in order to shine down from it to watch over all you have created. You are one alone, shining forth in your visible form as the living Aten, glorious, giving light, far off yet approaching nearby. You create the numberless visible forms from yourself, you who are one alone, cities, towns, fields, the road, the river, and each eye looks to you as its shining example. You are in the sun disk of day, overseer of wherever you go and whatever shall be, for you fashion their sight so that you may be complete as they celebrate with one voice your creation. Under Akhenaten, Aten was the god of royal worship, and no other cults were formally allowed. And Akhenaten himself may have been the only one who could commune with Aten, though this claim has countervailing evidence as well. This alleged detail of soul contact, and the religious revolution more broadly, may speak to an attempt by Akhenaten to wrest power from traditional priestly elites and theoretically consolidate himself as the only contact node between heaven and earth. Beyond the priests and their most concentrated power in Thebes, the moving of the capital to Akhenaten presumably wrested power as well from the elites at Memphis. The art produced under Akhenaten is stylistically distinct from that of prior generations, and it also depicted scenes, particularly those of familial intimacy, unseen in prior royal art. We can see here how portrayals would feature a narrow and elongated neck and face, large ears and lips, a large stomach, and large hips and thighs. Towards the end of Akhenaten's reign, he had two co-regent pharaohs, one after the other. The first was a man named Smenkhera, upon whose death a new co-regent was put forth, this time a woman, Nefer-Neferu Aten, who is likely Akhenaten's wife Nefertiti, who then ruled for as many as 3 years beyond Akhenaten's around 1336 BC death. Nefer-Neferu Aten's 3 post-Akhenaten years may have included Akhenaten's son through another woman, the child Tutankhaten, as co-regent. It's possible that Tutankhaten, better known by his later name Tutankhamen, or even better yet by King Tut, isn't Akhenaten's child and is perhaps the child of his co-regent Smenkhera. With Nefer-Neferu Aten's death, Tutankhaten ostensibly became the lone pharaoh of Egypt, but he was a mere child, 9 or possibly 10 years old at the time. His reign isn't notable for any great accomplishments, but is incredibly famous due to the discovery of his unbroken into tomb, its treasures untouched by looters. The 2 adults in the room during Tutankhamun's reign, however, were Ai the Vizier and Horemheb the General. They would soon be the last 2 of the 18th dynasty pharaohs. Tutankhaten would go on to reign for just 9 years, and under his reign, the ostensible return from the wayward ways of Akhenaten began. Atenism fell, Akhenaten was abandoned for Memphis, and Amun's primacy was reasserted. A stele set up in the name of Tutankhamun at the Temple of Amun at Karnak mentions the earlier falling into disrepair of temples and the grand statue of Amun Tutankhamun had built, which was harder to carry than any prior statue of the god. As the stele states, he fashioned an image of his father, the god Amun, to be upon 13 carrying poles, his sacred image being of electrum, lapis lazuli, turquoise, and every precious stone. Now, the majesty of this noble god had formerly been upon only 11 carrying poles. The young pharaoh's name was changed from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, and I'm not sure exactly when this next change happened, but perhaps around the same time his wife/half-sister, born to Akhenaten and Nefertiti, went from Ankhesenaten to Ankhesenamen. Ankhesenamen outlived Tutankhamun, becoming the last surviving member of the royal family, and it's often thought that from Ankhesenamen a fascinating letter mentioned in a Hittite text was sent up north. In the Hittite text, a letter is said to have been sent from an unclearly identified Egyptian queen to the Hittite king. The text the letter is mentioned in was found at Hattusa and records the deeds of the Hittite king Suppiluliuma. The letter mentioned in the text offered the Hittite king the opportunity to send a son of his down to Egypt to become pharaoh through marriage to this queen. This letter theoretically could have led to a greater unification of political will between these 2 major powers than mere allyship, though perhaps not. Who knows just how much power the man in this heretofore never done atop the Egyptian throne relationship would have had. Indeed, maybe this was a move to conserve power on Ankhesenamen's part, rather than risk seeing it divided or even lost to a powerful Egyptian political player, the servant of hers that she mentions. Some suspect that servant was Ai, who may be the one who ended up marrying Ankhesenamen. Let's take a closer look at the exchange recorded in the Hittite texts. The queen of Egypt, who was Dahamunzu, sent a messenger to my father and wrote to him thus: My husband died, a son I have not. But to thee, they say, the sons are many. If thou wouldst give me one son of thine, he would become my husband. Never shall I pick out a servant of mine and make him my husband. I am afraid. The Hittite king Suppiluliuma then called for a council meeting and expressed shock and suspicion, saying, Such a thing has never happened to me in my whole life. And he chose a messenger and instructed him, Go and bring thou the true word back to me. Maybe they deceive me. Maybe they do have a son of their lord. The messenger came back with a further message from the now offended Egyptian queen, who said, Why did thou say they deceive me in that way? Had I a son, would I have written about my own and my country's shame to a foreign land? Thou didst not believe me, and hast even spoken thus to me. She then repeated the childless situation and the request for a son of Suppiluliuma before adding, "To me he will be husband, but in Egypt he will be king." Nothing but trouble came from this, however, as the Hittite prince sent over, Zinanza, was murdered on the way, and this ingratiated Suppiluliuma not at all, and possibly in retaliation, the Hittite king intensified his Syrian presence and even sent Hittite troops into Egyptian-controlled territory in Canaan. Tensions would simmer and eventually boil over in the reign of Ramses II. Back to Ankhesenamun, she may have been married in the end to Ai. In any case, Ai assumed the throne around 1327 BC. Already in the tomb of Tutankhamun, Ai is shown wearing the crown of Egypt, as he's shown performing the opening of the mouth ceremony resurrecting Tutankhamun. But Ai was already old when he became pharaoh, and he didn't survive for long, at most 4 years, upon which the last 18th dynasty pharaoh, Horemheb, ascended the throne around 1323 BC. General turned pharaoh Horemheb saw to the eradication of the memory of the Amarna heresy, including not only Akhenaten but the following pharaohs' reigns as well. A significant act was Horemheb taking apart Akhenaten's temple and reusing the stone in the construction of his 2 pylons, the 9th and 10th. He removed Tutankhamun's name from the earlier pharaoh's monuments and replaced it with his own name. Horemheb's scribes presented the royal lineage as if Horemheb succeeded Amenhotep III, and the coming 19th dynasty report that reality accordingly. The memory of this period didn't entirely fade away, however, as somehow Manetho, writing in the 3rd century BC, was of the mind that 4 kings spanned the space between Amenhotep III and Horemheb. Horemheb's reign lasted to about 1295 BC, and he was followed by his vizier and chosen successor, the first pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, Ramses I. Ramses I's reign was short-lived, ruling from perhaps 1295 to 1294 BC. The next pharaoh was Ramses' son, Seti I. He reigned from perhaps 1294 to 1279 BC, building some and seeing an intensification in the Hatti-Egypt antagonisms. He fought several wars in Syria, where the vassals found themselves alternating in allyship with the 2 greater powers. And while for the moment the Egyptian and Hittite armies likely didn't face off against one another, Seti I captured the Hittite-controlled town of Kadesh, which soon returned to Hittite hands. Down south, Seti I established 2 small fortified towns about the Second Cataract. Among his restoration and building projects, some important ones are his temple at Abydos, a hypostyle hall addition to Amun's Karnak sanctuary, and his innovative, decorated beyond the main area, tomb in the Valley of the Kings. He also had a summer palace built at the site that would soon be called Pyramisi. Seti's son Ramses was his crown prince and became the pharaoh after Seti's death. Ramses II, or Ramses the Great, reigned for a very long time from around 1279 through 1213 BC. Ramses II campaigned up the Levant, reaching Byblos in year 4 of his reign. In year 5, he campaigned again and reached Kadesh, where the Hittite king and his forces were waiting. Combat ensued, and Kadesh wasn't taken by Egypt. This battle at Kadesh is often regarded by historians as largely a stalemate between Egypt and Hatti. But Ramses had it presented as a victory for Egypt and greatly commemorated the event. Of particular focus is the not believable role Ramses II claims to have played, where he single-handedly faced off against the Hittite army. While this claim is unbelievable to mostly everyone who encounters it now, Ramses himself may have been persuaded of it. As we see later in his reign, after peace was already reached in 1259 BC, we find Ramses asserting and defending a version of his claim in a letter to the then Hittite king Hattusili, in which he says, "And the king of Hatti attacked him with his army and all the countries that sided with him. But the king of Egypt defeated him on his own, although my army was not with me, although my horses were not with me. And I took the enemies from Hatti to Egypt in full view of the people of Egypt and the people of Hatti. So if you say about my army, was there really no army? Were there really no horses? I say, look, one of my divisions was in Amuru, one was in Tamina. That is the truth." In the inscriptions he had made in Egypt itself, he elaborates, "No officer was with me, no charioteer, no soldier of the army, no shield bearer. No infantry, my chariotry yielded before them. Not one of them stood firm to fight with them. Ramses then prays to Amun. Amun responds positively, and I found my heart stout, my breast in joy, all I did succeeded. Of the enemy, not one of them found his hand to fight. Their hearts failed in their bodies through fear of me. Their arms all slackened, they could not shoot, they had no heart to grasp their spears. The enemy forces witnessing this were overwhelmed. One calls out to the other, saying, No man is he among us, it is Seth, great of strength, Baal in person. Not deeds of man are these his doings, they are of one who is unique, who fights 100,000 without soldiers and chariots. Come quick, flee before him, to seek life and breathe air. For he who attempts to get close to him, his hands, all his limbs grow limp. One cannot hold either bow or spears, when one sees him come racing along. My majesty hunted them like a griffin, I slaughtered among them unceasingly. Later in his reign, perhaps 1259 BC, Hatti and Egypt entered into a peace treaty of which we have copies from both the Hittites and Egypt. The two powers agreed to not encroach on one another and to come to the other's aid in time of military need, be that from a foreign threat or a rebellion. In perhaps 1246 BC, relations grew warmer still with the sending of a Hittite princess, daughter of Hattusili, over to Egypt to marry Ramses. As for his constructions, there are many. He also appropriated the monuments of others, chiseling out the names of earlier pharaohs and putting his own, leading some to give him the humorous moniker, the Great Chiseler. And continuing in the steps of Horemheb, stone blocks of buildings of Akhenaten found their way into Ramses' monuments. Perhaps the most impressive of Ramses II's constructions are the two temples at Abu Simbel, where twin rock-cut temples were constructed, one in Ramses' honor and the other smaller temple for his queen Nefertari. Fronting both of these are massive statues of Ramses, 21 meters high for the larger temple, and 10-meter statues for the smaller temple, where two monumental statues of Nefertari stood as well. At some point from the 8th year on, Ramses was deified, and in the larger of these two temples, reliefs were recarved to add Ramses amongst the other deities depicted. Ramses had 6 more rock-cut temples built between the first and second cataracts, and 1 more temple there besides. He also had Pyramisi built up, expanding it to some 1,000 hectares, and in the process swallowing up Avaris. 2 examples of cultural mixing reflected in Ramses City are the molds for Hittite-style bronze shields, and the fact that the primary temple of Pyramisi's eastern quarter was for the Syrian goddess Astarte, who was integrated into the Egyptian pantheon as daughter of Ptah. We now take leave of Egypt to hopefully return in some 2 weeks' time. Until then, thank you for watching, and may the path behind continually aid in clarifying the one ahead.